Today, we're diving into one of the most lasting and, well, tense standoffs in the entire world, the division of the Korean Peninsula. It's a story that kicks off more than 75 years ago with just a simple line drawn almost randomly on a map. But the fallout from that one line created two completely different worlds and a war that, believe it or not, never actually ended. So, let's get into how this all happened.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at how the division even happened in the first place. Then, we'll jump into the absolutely brutal Korean War. After that, we'll explore the completely different paths the North and South went down, check out the modern-day cycle of diplomacy and hostility, and then wrap up by looking at what this unfinished story really means for us today.
So how does one single nation just split in two? Well, our story really begins right at the end of World War II. When one empire collapsed, it left this huge power vacuum, and you had two new global superpowers who were more than ready to jump in and fill it. What's really wild here is just how fast all of this went down. For 35 years, since 1910, Korea was under Japanese rule. So when Japan surrenders in 1945, the winners of the war step in. You've got the Soviet Union taking the North and the United States taking the South. And that dividing line they picked, the 38th parallel, that was only supposed to be temporary, just an administrative thing. But by 1948, that random line on a map had hardened into a permanent ideological border between two states that hated each other.
And right here, this really gets to the heart of the problem. Up north, you get the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK. It's formed under Kim Il-sung, a communist leader with full backing from the Soviet Union. Down south, you get the Republic of Korea, the ROK, led by Syngman Rhee, a fierce anti-communist backed by the United States. Just like that, the global Cold War had a brand new and very, very dangerous front line.
So now, you have two opposing countries, each led by a man who's claiming to be the only legitimate ruler of the entire peninsula. With that set up, a major conflict was pretty much inevitable. All the attempts at a diplomatic solution failed, and in 1950, the global Cold War turned brutally hot right there in Korea.
The war itself was this incredible, violent back and forth. On June 25, 1950, Kim Il-sung's army just stormed south, and they almost win the whole thing, pushing the South Korean and American forces into this tiny little corner of the peninsula. But then, this unbelievably risky UN landing in Incheon, led by General MacArthur, completely flips the script. The UN forces push all the way north to the Chinese border, which then brings China into the war. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops pour across the border, pushing the UN right back down. After 3 years of just savage fighting, the front line basically ends up right back where it started.
And this is the most crucial point to understand. The Korean War ended in July 1953 with an armistice. That's just a truce, a ceasefire. No peace treaty was ever signed, which means, technically, North and South Korea are still at war today. The agreement created the Demilitarized Zone, the DMZ, which is this heavily armed buffer that's still one of the most tense borders on the planet. And the cost was just staggering. In the West, it's often called the Forgotten War. But it was anything but forgotten for the people who lived it. Just look at these numbers. The North Korean and Chinese sides saw up to 2 million casualties. The South Korean and UN forces lost around 800,000. On top of that, countless civilians died, and American bombing campaigns basically leveled North Korea's cities. It was an absolute human tragedy on a massive scale. So, after the armistice, the two Koreas, separated by just 4 kilometers of no man's land, started evolving into two completely different worlds. Let's take a look at just how different their paths really became.
I mean, this table really just says it all, doesn't it? North Korea becomes this totalitarian state ruled by a single family, the Kim dynasty, and it's all built on this ideology of absolute self-reliance. Its economy is state-controlled and totally cut off from the world. South Korea, on the other hand, after going through its own period of military dictatorships, becomes this vibrant democracy. It goes all in on capitalism and turns into a global economic giant. Think Samsung, think Hyundai.
To really get a handle on North Korea, you have to understand this thing called juche. It's not just an ideology, it's a whole worldview. It preaches total independence from any foreign power and puts the military at the very center of the state. And crucially, it builds this intense cult of personality around the Kim family, making them out to be these almost godlike saviors of the nation.
For a little while after the war, their economies were actually pretty similar in terms of wealth. But the 1980s, that was the big turning point. South Korea's economy just shoots skyward in what people called the miracle on the Han River. At the same time, North Korea's super rigid state-run system just stalls out. Then, when its main supporter, the Soviet Union, collapses in 1991, the North Korean economy completely craters and it leads to a horrific famine. That wealth gap has only gotten wider ever since.
So, in the last few decades, the relationship between North and South has been this crazy, volatile cycle. You get these periods of real, genuine hope and diplomacy, and then they're just shattered by sudden acts of aggression. It's a real roller coaster.
One of the biggest moments of hope was the Sunshine Policy, which South Korea started in the late 90s. The whole idea was to gently engage with the North through talking and economic projects, with the belief that this would build trust and kind of calm things down. And it led to these historic summits between the leaders in joint projects like the Kaesong Industrial Complex, where South Korean companies actually hired North Korean workers.
But, and this is kind of the recurring story of this conflict, right, that hope was repeatedly crushed. As you can see here, North Korea just kept pushing ahead with its nuclear weapons program, which was a huge challenge to the whole region. Then, in 2010, tensions just exploded when a North Korean torpedo allegedly sank a South Korean warship. Later that same year, the North shelled a South Korean island, killing civilians. These provocations just kept derailing any progress, pulling the peninsula back from the brink of peace over and over again.
And yet, that cycle just keeps on turning. The summits between North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un and the U.S. president at the time, Donald Trump, in Singapore and Hanoi, those were historic. I mean, we saw images that would have been completely unthinkable just a few years before. Now, they didn't end up producing a lasting deal, but they showed that even in the worst of times, dialogue is never completely off the table.
So, where does all of this leave us today? Well, the Korean conflict isn't some dusty piece of history. It is a living, breathing reality that has massive consequences for millions and millions of people right now.
28,500. That is the number of American soldiers who are still based in South Korea today. They're a living deterrent, a military tripwire, and a physical reminder of the security alliance that was forged in the war, a direct result of that ceasefire back in 1953.
But beyond all the geopolitics, there is this profound human tragedy. The war literally ripped families in half. More than 130,000 South Koreans have registered just for a chance to see their relatives in the North, relatives they haven't seen in over 70 years. Only a tiny, tiny fraction have ever gotten that chance in these rare, brief, and just heart-wrenching reunion events. And for most of them, time is running out.
And this quote, man, it just sums it all up perfectly. The Berlin Wall is gone. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. But right here, along the 38th parallel, the ideological battle that defined the 20th century is still alive and well. It is a true relic of a past era, but its tensions are shaping our present every single day.
Which really brings us to this final, crucial question. For older Koreans, the ones who actually remember a single nation, reunification is this deeply emotional dream. But for younger South Koreans who've only ever known a nuclear-armed, impoverished neighbor, the whole idea is often seen as a massive economic burden, a distant fantasy. So as the generations who remember one Korea pass away, is the very dream of it fading too? The future of the peninsula is still very much being written.